The ultrasound screen flickered in the dimly lit hospital room, showing two tiny figures curled together in perfect symmetry. Dr. Martinez adjusted the probe, her expression shifting from routine to concern as she studied the images more carefully. One baby appeared completely normal, active, and healthy. The other showed clear signs of spina bifida, the spine visibly underdeveloped even at 22 weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Chun, the doctor said softly, we need to discuss your options. Sarah Chun gripped her husband's hand tighter, tears already forming in her eyes. Michael Chun stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. They had been trying for children for 5 years. Now they were faced with a choice that would define their family forever. We keep both, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Whatever it takes. The doctor nodded solemnly, knowing the challenges that lay ahead for this family. 17 years later, the morning alarm buzzed through the modest 2-story house in Riverside, Colorado. Emma Chun had been awake for 20 minutes. Already, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing for another day at Jefferson High School. Her custom wheelchair sat beside the bed, its purple frame catching the early morning light streaming through her bedroom window. The house carried the familiar sounds of a family starting their day. Downstairs, her mother Sarah was already in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling to life. Her father Michael was in the shower, preparing for another 10-hour shift at the auto repair shop. And somewhere in the basement, the rhythmic thudding of heavy bags and the scrape of weights across concrete told her that her twin brother, Jake, was already deep into his morning training routine. Emma transferred herself from bed to wheelchair. With practiced efficiency, a routine she had perfected over the years. She chose her clothes carefully, a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes and dark jeans that fit well around her legs. Her long black hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she took a moment to braid it back, knowing it would be one less thing for the bullies to grab at. The Chun family had moved to Riverside 3 years ago when Michael lost his job at the Denver shop. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for the twins to finish high school somewhere new. What they hadn't anticipated was how cruel small-town teenagers could be to someone they perceived as different. Emma wheeled herself to the kitchen, where her mother was packing lunches with military precision. Sarah Chun had become an expert at anticipating needs, at smoothing over difficulties before they arose. She looked up as Emma entered, her smile warm but worried. "Morning, sweetheart. I made your favorite turkey and Swiss with extra pickles." "Thanks, Mom." Emma accepted the lunch bag, noting how her mother's hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, as if she could somehow transfer protection through touch. Jake emerged from the basement, his training gear soaked with sweat. At 17, he was already built like a professional fighter, 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that showed the definition of someone who spent hours perfecting his craft. His knuckles were permanently scarred from years of training, and his nose had been broken twice in amateur competitions. Despite being twins, he and Emma looked nothing alike except for their shared dark eyes and the stubborn set of their chins. "Morning," he said, grabbing a protein shake from the refrigerator. "Need a ride today?" Emma shook her head. "I'm taking the bus." "You have that training session with Coach Rodriguez, remember?" Jake's expression darkened. "I can skip it." "Those idiots on the bus." "Jake," Emma's voice carried a warning tone. "They had this conversation almost daily. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it," he muttered, but dropped the subject. Jake had been suspended twice in the past year for fighting, both times defending Emma from bullies. The school had made it clear that one more incident would result in expulsion, which would end his chances of getting the MMA scholarship he needed for college. Their father entered the kitchen, his work clothes already stained with grease despite the early hour. Michael Chen was a quiet man who believed in solving problems with action rather than words. He kissed his wife's cheek and squeezed Emma's shoulder. "You call if you need anything," he said, the same words he spoke every morning. "I will, Dad." But they all knew she wouldn't call. Emma had learned early that drawing attention to problems often made them worse. The school bus arrived at 7:15 a.m. sharp, its yellow bulk idling at the corner of Maple and 3rd. Emma said goodbye to her family and wheeled herself down the gently sloping ramp her father had built from their front porch to the sidewalk. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of the first snow that would come soon to the Colorado mountains. Other students were already gathered at the bus stop, their conversations dying as Emma approached. She recognized most of them. Riverside wasn't large enough for true anonymity. There was Ashley Morrison, the mayor's daughter who had never spoken directly to Emma, but wasn't actively cruel either. Tommy Valdez, a quiet kid who worked at the Bay grocery store after school. And unfortunately, there was also Marcus Reed and his crew. Marcus was the starting quarterback for the Jefferson High Eagles, a position that granted him significant social capital in a town where Friday night football games were community events. He was handsome in a conventional way, blonde hair, blue eyes, and the kind of athletic build that photographed well for the local newspaper's sports section. He was also the primary architect of Emma's daily misery. "Well, well," Marcus said as Emma positioned herself near the bus stop sign. "Look who's rolling up to join us." His friends, Tyler Brooks, the offensive lineman, and Cameron Walsh, who played wide receiver, snickered at what they considered cleverness. Emma kept her eyes forward, focusing on the approaching bus. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Marcus continued, stepping closer. "Don't you think it's rude to ignore people?" The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, and Emma felt a moment of relief. But as the doors opened and she began to wheel toward the handicap lift, Marcus stepped in front of her. "You know, there's probably more room in the back of the bus," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "With all the equipment and stuff." Emma's face burned with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get on the bus." "Sure thing, Wheels," Marcus said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. The bus driver, an older man named Frank who had been driving the same route for 15 years, activated the wheelchair lift without comment. Emma had learned not to expect intervention from adults. They either pretended not to notice or worse, treated her with the kind of pitying kindness that somehow felt more insulting than outright cruelty. The lift raised her to bus level, and Emma wheeled herself to the designated handicap seating area near the front. She secured her wheelchair with practiced movements, clicking the locks into place just as the bus lurched forward. Behind her, she could hear Marcus and his friends settling into their usual seats, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. She put in her earbuds and tried to lose herself in music, but she could still feel their eyes on her. Every bump in the road seemed to jostle her chair more than usual, and she suspected they were making it worse by pushing on her seat back. Jefferson High School loomed ahead, a sprawling brick building that had been built in the 1960s and showed every year of its age. The campus was not particularly wheelchair accessible, despite the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. Emma had learned to navigate the long ramps that had been added as afterthoughts, to plan her routes around the elevators that frequently broke down, and to accept that some parts of the school would simply remain off-limits to her dot as the bus pulled up to the school entrance. Emma prepared herself for another day of navigating more than just the physical challenges of Jefferson High. She waited for the other students to exit before activating the lift, a small courtesy that seemed to make no difference in how she was treated but helped her maintain some sense of dignity. The morning air was colder now, and Emma pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders as she wheeled toward the main entrance. The school day hadn't officially started yet, but already she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her movement across the courtyard. Inside the building, the hallways were beginning to fill with students grabbing books from lockers and catching up on homework they hadn't finished the night before. Emma made her way to her locker, number 247, which was positioned at the perfect height for wheelchair access. It was one of the few accommodations the school had made that actually worked. She was organizing her books when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Emma, wait up." She turned to see Sofia Martinez approaching, her dark hair bouncing as she hurried down the hallway. Sofia was one of the few students at Jefferson who treated Emma like a normal person rather than a charity case or a target. They had been partners in AP chemistry since the beginning of the semester, and Emma had discovered that Sofia was not only genuinely kind, but also wickedly funny when she thought no one was listening. "Hey, Soph," Emma said, genuinely smiling. "For the first time that morning, did you finish the lab report?" Sofia asked, adjusting her backpack. "I got stuck on the calculations for the third reaction." "Yeah, I can show you during lunch if you want. The trick is to balance the equation first, then work backwards from the products." Sofia's face lit up with relief. "You're a lifesaver. I swear, chemistry is going to be the death of me." The ultrasound screen flickered in the dimly lit hospital room, showing two tiny figures curled together in perfect symmetry. Dr. Martinez adjusted the probe. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Mrs. Chun," the doctor said softly, "we need to discuss your options." Sarah Chun gripped her husband's hand tighter, tears already forming in her eyes. Michael Chun stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. They had been trying for children for 5 years. Now they were faced with a choice that would define their family forever. "We keep both," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Whatever it takes." The doctor nodded solemnly, knowing the challenges that lay ahead for this family. 17 years later, the morning alarm buzzed through the modest 2-story house in Riverside, Colorado. Emma Chun had been awake for 20 minutes. Already, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing for another day at Jefferson High School. Her custom wheelchair sat beside the bed, its purple frame catching the early morning light streaming through her bedroom window. The house carried the familiar sounds of a family starting their day. Downstairs, her mother Sarah was already in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling to life. Her father Michael was in the shower, preparing for another 10-hour shift at the auto repair shop. And somewhere in the basement, the rhythmic thudding of heavy bags and the scrape of weights across concrete told her that her twin brother, Jake, was already deep into his morning training routine. Emma transferred herself from bed to wheelchair. With practiced efficiency, a routine she had perfected over the years. She chose her clothes carefully, a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes and dark jeans that fit well around her legs. Her long black hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she took a moment to braid it back, knowing it would be one less thing for the bullies to grab at. The Chun family had moved to Riverside 3 years ago when Michael lost his job at the Denver shop. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for the twins to finish high school somewhere new. What they hadn't anticipated was how cruel small-town teenagers could be to someone they perceived as different. Emma wheeled herself to the kitchen where her mother was packing lunches with military precision. Sarah Chun had become an expert at anticipating needs, at smoothing over difficulties before they arose. She looked up as Emma entered, her smile warm but worried. "Morning, sweetheart. I made your favorite turkey and Swiss with extra pickles." "Thanks, Mom." Emma accepted the lunch bag, noting how her mother's hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, as if she could somehow transfer protection through touch. Jake emerged from the basement, his training gear soaked with sweat. At 17, he was already built like a professional fighter, 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that showed the definition of someone who spent hours perfecting his craft. His knuckles were permanently scarred from years of training, and his nose had been broken twice in amateur competitions. Despite being twins, he and Emma looked nothing alike except for their shared dark eyes and the stubborn set of their chins. "Morning, Em," he said, grabbing a protein shake from the refrigerator. "Need a ride today?" Emma shook her head. "I'm taking the bus. You have that training session with Coach Rodriguez, remember?" Jake's expression darkened. "I can skip it." "Those idiots on the bus. Jake." Emma's voice carried a warning tone. "They had this conversation almost daily. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it," he muttered, but dropped the subject. Jake had been suspended twice in the past year for fighting, both times defending Emma from bullies. The school had made it clear that one more incident would result in expulsion, which would end his chances of getting the MMA scholarship he needed for college. Their father entered the kitchen, his work clothes already stained with grease despite the early hour. Michael Chen was a quiet man who believed in solving problems with action rather than words. He kissed his wife's cheek and squeezed Emma's shoulder. "You call if you need anything," he said, the same words he spoke every morning. "I will, Dad." But they all knew she wouldn't call. Emma had learned early that drawing attention to problems often made them worse. The school bus arrived at 7:15 a.m. sharp, its yellow bulk idling at the corner of Maple and 3rd. Emma said goodbye to her family and wheeled herself down the gently sloping ramp her father had built from their front porch to the sidewalk. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of the first snow that would come soon to the Colorado mountains. Other students were already gathered at the bus stop, their conversations dying as Emma approached. She recognized most of them. Riverside wasn't large enough for true anonymity. There was Ashley Morrison, the mayor's daughter who had never spoken directly to Emma, but wasn't actively cruel either. Tommy Valdez, a quiet kid who worked at the grocery store after school. And unfortunately, there was also Marcus Reed and his crew. Marcus was the starting quarterback for the Jefferson High Eagles, a position that granted him significant social capital in a town where Friday night football games were community events. He was handsome in a conventional way, blonde hair, blue eyes, and the kind of athletic build that photographed well for the local newspaper's sports section. He was also the primary architect of Emma's daily misery. "Well, well," Marcus said as Emma positioned herself near the bus stop sign. "Look who's rolling up to join us." His friends, Tyler Brooks, the offensive lineman, and Cameron Walsh, who played wide receiver, snickered at what they considered cleverness. Emma kept her eyes forward, focusing on the approaching bus. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Marcus continued, stepping closer. "Don't you think it's rude to ignore people?" The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, and Emma felt a moment of relief. But as the doors opened and she began to wheel toward the handicap lift, Marcus stepped in front of her. "You know, there's probably more room in the back of the bus," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "With all the equipment and stuff." Emma's face burned with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get on the bus." "Sure thing, Wheels," Marcus said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. The bus driver, an older man named Frank who had been driving the same route for 15 years, activated the wheelchair lift without comment. Emma had learned not to expect intervention from adults. They either pretended not to notice or, worse, treated her with the kind of pitying kindness that somehow felt more insulting than outright cruelty. The lift raised her to bus level, and Emma wheeled herself to the designated handicap seating area near the front. She secured her wheelchair with practiced movements, clicking the locks into place just as the bus lurched forward. Behind her, she could hear Marcus and his friends settling into their usual seats, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. She put in her earbuds and tried to lose herself in music, but she could still feel their eyes on her. Every bump in the road seemed to jostle her chair more than usual, and she suspected they were making it worse by pushing on her seat back. Jefferson High School loomed ahead, a sprawling brick building that had been built in the 1960s and showed every year of its age. The campus was not particularly wheelchair accessible, despite the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. Emma had learned to navigate the long ramps that had been added as afterthoughts, to plan her routes around the elevators that frequently broke down, and to accept that some parts of the school would simply remain off-limits to her dot as the bus pulled up to the school entrance. Emma prepared herself for another day of navigating more than just the physical challenges of Jefferson High. She waited for the other students to exit before activating the lift, a small courtesy that seemed to make no difference in how she was treated but helped her maintain some sense of dignity. Her expression shifting from routine to concern as she studied the images more carefully. One baby appeared completely normal, active, and healthy. The other showed clear signs of spina bifida, the spine visibly underdeveloped even at 22 weeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Fitzgerald nodded approvingly. Excellent analysis. The social model of disability argues that, "Must be nice to have all that time to study," Marcus muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "When you don't have to worry about sports or jobs or anything physical." Emma felt her face flush, but Mrs. Fitzgerald had heard as well. "Mr. Reed, do you have something to contribute to our discussion about labor rights?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice now properly respectful. But Emma could see the smirk on his face, and she knew this wouldn't be the end of it. The class period ended with Emma gathering her materials while other students filed out. She waited for the crowd to thin before heading to the elevator, but Marcus and his friends Tyler and Cameron lingered in the hallway. "Hey, Emma," Marcus called out as she approached the elevator. "I was thinking about what you said in class. About barriers and stuff." Emma pressed the elevator button, hoping the car would arrive quickly. "What about it?" "Well, I was wondering if you've ever considered that maybe some barriers are just natural, like evolution and survival of the fittest and all that." Tyler and Cameron flanked him, blocking Emma's path to the elevator even as it arrived with a soft chime. Emma felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her voice level. "I need to get to my next class." Sure, Marcus said, stepping aside, but not enough to give her a clear passage. "I'm just saying, maybe it's not society's job to change everything for every person. Maybe some people are just meant to adapt more than others." The elevator doors started to close, and Emma had to reach out quickly to stop them. As she maneuvered into the car, she heard Cameron say, "Shouldn't she be more grateful? I mean, she gets to sit down all day." The elevator doors closed on their laughter, but Emma could feel the interaction echoing in her mind as she descended to the first floor. She had developed thick skin over the years, but something about Marcus's pseudo-intellectual cruelty felt more poisonous than simple name-calling. Her second period was a chemistry with Sophia, and Emma found herself looking forward to the lab work. Science had always been her strongest subject, and she appreciated how chemical reactions followed predictable rules. Regardless of who was observing them, Sophia was already at their shared lab bench when Emma arrived, safety goggles pushed up on her forehead and a slightly panicked expression on her face. "Please tell me you understand today's experiment," Sophia said as Emma positioned herself at the bench. "Because I read the instructions 3 times and I'm still confused." Emma looked at the lab sheet and the equipment laid out before them. "It's a titration experiment. We're determining the concentration of an unknown acid solution by adding base until we reach the equivalence point." "Right," Sophia said, though her expression suggested she was still lost. "And the equivalence point is?" When the indicator changes color. Look, I'll show you. Emma began setting up the apparatus, her movements confident and precise. She had discovered that her wheelchair actually provided some advantages in lab work. She could remain at a consistent height while working, and she could brace equipment against her chair for stability. As they worked through the experiment, Emma found herself relaxing for the first time all day. Sophia's genuine curiosity and lack of judgment created a small bubble of normalcy in what was otherwise a hostile environment. "You know," Sophia said as they waited for their solution to change color, "you should really consider applying to some of the big chemistry programs. CU Boulder, Colorado State, maybe even some out-of-state schools." Emma's smile faded slightly. "I don't know. College is expensive, and with all the accommodations I'd need. Are you kidding? You're probably going to get a full ride based on your grades alone. And besides," Sophia lowered her voice, "my cousin goes to CU, and she says the chemistry building is actually really accessible. Better than this place anyway." The indicator solution suddenly shifted from clear to pale pink, and Emma quickly stopped the titration. "Perfect, that's our endpoint." They recorded their data and cleaned up their equipment as the class period wound down. Emma found herself thinking about Sophia's words. She had always assumed that college would be more of the same: new buildings, new people, but the same fundamental challenges and prejudices. "Sophia," Emma said as they packed up their materials, "do you really think things would be different in college?" Sophia paused in her cleanup. "I think they'd be different because you'd have more control over your environment. You could choose your classes, your living situation, your friends. And honestly, most college students are too busy failing organic chemistry to worry about what everyone else is doing." The bell rang, and Emma headed to her third period English class. The teacher, Mr. David Morrison, Ashley's father, was a decent man who treated Emma fairly but seemed uncomfortable with her presence. He had a tendency to speak slightly louder when addressing her, as if her leg's inability to function had somehow affected her hearing. The class was discussing To Kill a Mockingbird, and Emma found herself thinking about the themes of prejudice and justice that ran throughout the novel. She wondered if Harper Lee had ever considered how different forms of bias intersected and reinforced each other. During the discussion, Ashley Morrison raised her hand. "I think the book is trying to say that prejudice is learned, not natural. Like children aren't born racist. They learn it from their parents and their community." Emma found herself nodding along, but then Tyler Brooks spoke up from the back of the room. "But isn't some prejudice just practical? Like if you see someone who's different, isn't it natural to be cautious?" Emma felt her stomach tighten. She could sense where this conversation was heading, and she could see Mr. Morrison's discomfort as he tried to navigate the discussion. "That's an interesting point, Tyler," the teacher said carefully. "But I think we need to distinguish between caution and prejudice. Caution is based on specific, relevant information. Prejudice is based on assumptions about entire groups of people. But what if those assumptions are usually right?" Tyler continued. "Like, if someone can't do certain things, isn't it fair to assume they probably can't do other things too?" Emma felt every eye in the classroom turn toward her. The discussion had shifted from academic to personal, and she knew she was expected to respond. Her hands clenched in her lap. "I think," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside, "that the difference between caution and prejudice is whether you give people a chance to prove your assumptions wrong." The classroom fell silent. Mr. Morrison looked relieved that Emma had responded diplomatically, but Emma could see the smirks on Tyler and Cameron's faces. They had successfully turned a class discussion into another opportunity to make her uncomfortable. As the class period ended, Emma gathered her materials and prepared for the most challenging part of her day lunch period. Unlike classes where teachers provided some minimal supervision, lunch was largely unstructured time where students self-organized into social groups. Emma typically ate in the library, where Mrs. Patricia Owens, the librarian, allowed food as long as students were quiet. It was a sanctuary of sorts, filled with students who, like Emma, didn't fit into the cafeteria's rigid social hierarchies. But today, as Emma wheeled toward the library, she found her path blocked by Marcus, Tyler, and Cameron. They were standing in the hallway intersection, positioned in a way that made it impossible for Emma to pass without confronting them directly. "Hey, Emma," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone of false friendliness. "We were just talking about your brother." Emma's blood ran cold. Her family had always been an unspoken boundary, something the Bullies had never crossed before. "What about him?" "Oh, just curious about his little fighting hobby," Marcus continued. "I heard he's got some big tournament coming up. State championship or something." Emma said nothing, but her silence seemed to encourage Marcus to continue. "Must be nice to have someone to fight your battles for you," he said, stepping closer. "I mean, that's what twins are for, right? One of you handles the physical stuff, and the other, well, the other just sits there and watches." Tyler and Cameron laughed, but Emma could see something dangerous in Marcus's eyes. This wasn't just casual cruelty anymore. This felt calculated, purposeful. "I need to get to the library," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sure thing," Marcus said, stepping aside. "Just remember, not all of us are as impressed by your brother's tough guy act as you might think." As Emma wheeled past them, she heard Cameron say, "Maybe someone should teach him that fighting doesn't solve everything." Emma's hands were shaking as she entered the library. She found her usual table in the back corner and tried to focus on her lunch, but Marcus's words echoed in her mind. For the first time, she wondered if her presence at Jefferson High wasn't just making her own life miserable. It might be putting Jake at risk too. She pulled out her phone and started to text Jake, then stopped. What would she say? That the Bullies were now threatening him? That she was scared? Jake was less than 2 weeks away from the state championship, the culmination of years of training and his best chance at a college scholarship. Emma deleted the unsent text and put her phone away. She would handle this herself, just like she always had. She couldn't let her problems interfere with Jake's future. But as she sat in the quiet library, surrounded by books and the soft whisper of turning pages, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. The bullying had escalated beyond casual cruelty, and she was no longer sure she could handle it alone. That evening, Emma sat at her desk working on calculus homework when she heard the familiar rhythm of Jake's training session drifting up from the basement. The sound was different tonight, more intense, almost aggressive. Each impact against the heavy bag seemed to carry extra force, and she could hear him breathing hard between combinations. Their father had converted the basement into a makeshift gym 3 years ago, installing rubber mats, hanging a heavy bag from the reinforced ceiling beams, and setting up a small area with free weights. It wasn't much compared to the professional facilities where Jake sometimes trained, but it was theirs. Emma closed her calculus book and wheeled herself to the top of the basement stairs. The staircase was narrow and steep, making it impossible for her wheelchair to navigate. It was one of the few areas of their house that remained completely inaccessible to her, and she had long since accepted this limitation. "Jake," she called down, "everything okay?" The punching stopped abruptly. She heard footsteps on the concrete floor. Then Jake appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his face flushed and sweat dripping from his hair. "Yeah, just working on combinations," he said, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. "Coach Rodriguez wants me to focus on my ground game before state. How many more days until the championship?" 12. Jake wiped his face with a towel. 12 days to make everything count. Emma studied her brother's expression. They had always been able to read each other's moods, a twin telepathy that their parents joked about, but that felt entirely real to them. Something was bothering Jake, something beyond pre-competition nerves. "Jake, did something happen at school today?" "Why would you ask that?" Emma hesitated. She hadn't planned to tell Jake about Marcus's threats, but seeing him like this made her reconsider. "Some of the football players were asking about you." "About the tournament." Jake's expression darkened. He climbed the stairs until he was eye level with Emma, his hands gripping the railing. "What did they say exactly?" "It wasn't what they said. It was how they said it. Marcus Reed was ... Oh no." It felt like a threat. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring past Emma toward the kitchen where their parents were watching the evening news. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Emma, I need to tell you something. But you have to promise not to freak out." Emma felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" "Coach Rodriguez got a call today. Someone contacted the Colorado State Athletic Commission, claiming I'd been using performance-enhancing drugs." Emma stared at her brother in shock. "That's insane. You've never even taken protein supplements without researching every ingredient." "I know. Coach knows. The commission knows. They tested me last month and I was completely clean. But the accusation has to be investigated formally." "What does that mean for the championship?" Jake's jaw tightened. "I can still compete, but if there's any doubt, any irregularity in the paperwork, I could be disqualified. And if I'm disqualified..." "The scholarship," Emma finished. "The scholarship," Jake confirmed. "Coach thinks someone is trying to mess with my head before the fight. Get me distracted, make me second-guess myself." Emma felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. It was Marcus. Or his father. His dad is on the school board, and I bet he has connections. "You don't know that for sure." "Jake, they threatened you today. And Mayor Reed has been trying to get funding cut for the district's MMA program since last year. He thinks it's too violent for high school students." Jake considered this, his expression growing grimmer. "If that's true, then this isn't just about bullying anymore. This is about sabotage." Their conversation was interrupted by their mother calling them for dinner. Jake squeezed Emma's shoulder as they headed toward the kitchen. "Don't say anything to Mom and Dad yet," he said quietly. "I want to see how this plays out first." Dinner at the Chun household was typically a quiet affair, but tonight their parents seemed more talkative than usual. Sarah had received a call from Emma's guidance counselor about college applications, and she was excited to discuss the possibilities. "Mrs. Patterson says you're ranked 3rd in your class," Sarah said, serving rice from a large bowl. "She thinks you have a real shot at getting into some excellent programs." Emma glanced at Jake, who was pushing food around his plate without much appetite. "I've been thinking about it. Sophia mentioned that CU Boulder has a good chemistry department." "Boulder's not too far," Michael said approvingly. "You could come home on weekends if you wanted." "Actually," Emma said carefully, "I was thinking about maybe looking at some schools that are further away, maybe even out of state." The statement hung in the air for a moment. Sarah set down her fork, and Michael looked up from his plate. "Sweetheart, that's wonderful that you're thinking big," Sarah said slowly, "but out-of-state tuition is expensive, and you'd need so many accommodations." "I know it would be complicated," Emma said, feeling defensive. "But I've been researching programs, and there are schools with really good accessibility services and financial aid." "Emma," Michael said gently, "I think what your mother is trying to say is that we want to make sure you're being realistic about your options." Emma felt her face flush. Even her parents, who loved and supported her, couldn't imagine her succeeding outside their protective environment. The assumption that she needed to stay close to home, that she was inherently limited in her choices, stung more than any of Marcus's insults. "I am being realistic," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I have a 4.2 GPA. I'm taking 5 AP classes. I scored a 1520 on the SAT. Those aren't charity scores because I'm in a wheelchair. Of course not, Sarah said quickly. We're proud of you, Emma. We just want to make sure you have a support system. Maybe I don't want to need a support system forever, Emma said, immediately regretting how harsh she sounded. An uncomfortable silence settled over the dinner table. Jake cleared his throat. I think Emma should apply wherever she wants, he said. If she gets accepted, we'll figure out the rest. Emma shot him a grateful look, but you could see the worry in her parents' eyes. They had spent 17 years building a carefully controlled environment where Emma could succeed despite her challenges. The idea of her venturing into the unknown world beyond their protection clearly terrified them. After dinner, Emma retreated to her room to work on her college application essays. She had been putting off writing the personal statement, unsure how to discuss her disability without making it the centerpiece of her identity. Every draft she attempted felt either too self-pitying or too inspirational, neither of which represented how she actually felt about her life. She was staring at a blank computer screen when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey Wheels. Hope you enjoyed dinner with your family. Might be one of the last peaceful ones for a while. Emma's hands shook as she read the message. Marcus somehow had her phone number, which meant he had gone to some effort to get it. This wasn't random bullying anymore, it was targeted harassment. A second message arrived. Your brother thinks he's tough. But everyone has weaknesses. Everyone has something to lose. Emma deleted both messages but took screenshots first. She considered showing them to Jake, but he was already dealing with the drug testing investigation. She thought about telling her parents, but they would want to call the school, the police, maybe even pull her out of Jefferson entirely. Instead, Emma opened her laptop and began researching Marcus Reed. If he was going to escalate this conflict, she wanted to understand exactly who she was dealing with. Marcus was 17, a senior like her and Jake. His father, Robert Reed, had been mayor of Riverside for 6 years and owned the largest construction company in the county. His mother, Patricia Reed, was a real estate agent and served on the school board. Marcus had 2 younger sisters, both of whom attended Jefferson's middle school. On social media, Marcus presented himself as the all-American teenager, football captain, honor roll student, and volunteer at local charity events. His Instagram was filled with pictures of football victories, family vacations, and posed shots with his girlfriend, a cheerleader named Brittany Cox. But Emma noticed something interesting in the comment sections of his posts. While most were typical teenage congratulations and emoji reactions, there were occasional hints of a darker side. References to parties that had gotten out of hand, jokes about teaching lessons to underclassmen, and subtle boasting about getting away with things that others couldn't. Emma spent 2 hours diving deeper into Marcus's online presence, following links and cross-referencing information. What she discovered painted a picture of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions, someone who had learned that his family's status in the community provided a shield against accountability. She also found something else. Marcus had applied for early admission to Colorado State University, the same school that was offering Jake his potential, a scholarship. If Jake lost his scholarship opportunity, it would open up space in the athletic program that Marcus's family connections might be able to exploit. Emma leaned back in her wheelchair, her mind racing. This wasn't just about bullying or even about Jake's tournament. This was about Marcus eliminating competition for college opportunities, using his family's influence to clear his path forward. Her phone buzzed again with another unknown number. Sleep tight, Emma. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Emma turned off her phone and wheeled herself to her bedroom window. Outside, Riverside looked peaceful under the streetlights, a quiet Colorado town where families like hers had moved seeking safety and opportunity. But Emma was beginning to understand that predators existed everywhere, and sometimes they wore letterman jackets and honor roll pins. She had spent 3 years trying to survive at Jefferson High by keeping her head down and avoiding confrontation. But Marcus had made this personal, and he had threatened her family. Emma might not be able to fight back physically, but she was beginning to realize that there were other kinds of strength, other ways to level a playing field. As she prepared for bed, Emma made a decision. Tomorrow she will stop being a victim. She would start being a strategist. Emma arrived at school the next morning with a small digital recorder hidden in her backpack and her phone set to automatically back up photos to cloud storage. If Marcus wanted to escalate their conflict, she would make sure there was evidence of everything that happened. The first sign that something was different came during second period chemistry. Sophia was absent, which was unusual since she never missed their lab days. Emma worked alone on the day's experiment, measuring pH levels in various solutions. When she overheard Tyler Brooks talking to his lab partner, "I heard Martinez got food poisoning from that Mexican place on 5th Street, Tyler was saying. Whole family was sick all night. Emma's hands stilled on her equipment. Sophia's family didn't eat at restaurants during the week. Her mother was particular about home-cooked meals on school nights. And 5th Street's only Mexican restaurant was actually run by a Korean family that had been there for 15 years. During lunch break, Emma tried calling Sophia but got voicemail. She sent several texts that went unread. A cold certainty began growing in her chest that Sophia's absence was connected to yesterday's threats. She was eating alone in the library when her phone buzzed with a message from another unknown number. "Notice your friend isn't here today? Funny how these things happen." Emma's hands shook as she typed back, "What did you do to Sophia?" The reply came immediately, "Nothing permanent yet, but her family's landscaping business depends on city contracts. Be a shame if those got reevaluated." Emma stared at the message in horror. Marcus wasn't just threatening her anymore. He was using his family's political influence to hurt innocent people. Sophia's parents ran a small landscaping company that did maintenance work for several city buildings. Losing those contracts could destroy their livelihood. A second message arrived. "Meet me at the senior parking lot after school. Come alone. Bring your brother, and Sophia's family business disappears permanently." Emma deleted the messages but saved screenshots. She spent the rest of lunch period researching the Martinez family's business contracts with the city. Sure enough, 3 of their biggest accounts were city properties: the library, the municipal building, and the community center. All contracts that would be subject to annual review by the city council. The afternoon dragged by in a haze of anxiety. Emma couldn't concentrate on her classes, her mind spinning through possible scenarios. She considered telling a teacher. But what proof did she have? Anonymous text messages could have come from anyone, and Marcus was smart enough not to leave obvious evidence. During her final period in study hall, Emma made a decision that surprised even her. She wheeled herself to the main office and asked to speak with Principal Janet Williams. Principal Williams was a stern woman in her early 60s who had been running Jefferson High for 8 years. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for avoiding controversy that might reflect poorly on the school district. "Miss Chun," Principal Williams said, gesturing for Emma to enter her office. "What can I do for you?" Emma had rehearsed this conversation in her head, choosing her words carefully. "I wanted to discuss some concerns about student safety, particularly regarding harassment that's been escalating recently." Principal Williams leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "Are you reporting harassment, Emma?" "I'm reporting patterns of behavior that seem designed to intimidate students and their families. Behavior that extends beyond school grounds and involves threats against local businesses." Emma pulled out her phone and showed Principal Williams the screenshots of the text messages. Though she kept the sender's identities ambiguous, she also mentioned Sophia's sudden absence and the suspicious circumstances surrounding it. Principal Williams studied the messages carefully. "These are serious allegations, Emma. Do you know who sent these messages?" Emma hesitated. She had no direct proof that Marcus was behind the texts, only circumstantial evidence and strong suspicion. "I have theories, but I think it would be better if you investigated rather than me making accusations." "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," Principal Williams said. "I'll need to involve the school resource officer and possibly the police if these threats continue. In the meantime, I want you to report any further incidents immediately." Emma nodded, though she doubted Principal Williams would be able to act quickly enough to help with today's confrontation. She left the office feeling slightly better about having created an official record, but still dreading the after-school meeting. As the final bell rang, Emma made her way toward the senior parking lot. The area was largely empty, with most students having left for the day or headed to after-school activities. She positioned herself near the entrance, where she would be visible to any passing teachers or security cameras. Marcus arrived 5 minutes later, accompanied by Tyler and Cameron. They approached slowly, their body language casual, but their eyes alert. Marcus was carrying his football gear bag, and Emma noticed that his knuckles were scraped, fresh injuries that hadn't been there that morning. "Good you came," Marcus said, stopping about 10 feet away from Emma's wheelchair. "And you came alone, which shows you're smarter than I thought. What do you want, Marcus?" Emma asked, grateful that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I want you to understand the situation," Marcus replied. "You see, your family has been causing problems for my family. Your brother's little fighting hobby is making people nervous. Violence has no place in schools, and some people think the MMA program should be shut down entirely. Jake trains at a private gym. His fighting has nothing to do with school. But his scholarship does," Marcus said, stepping closer. "That scholarship is taking money away from other programs that benefit more students." Emma realized what this was really about. "You want the athletic department funding redirected." "I want resources allocated properly," Marcus corrected. "Football brings revenue to the school, community support, college recruiters. Your brother's cage fighting brings bad publicity and insurance liability." Tyler and Cameron moved to flank Emma's wheelchair, not threateningly, but in a way that made it clear she couldn't leave without going through them. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued, "I'm not unreasonable. I'm prepared to offer you a deal." Emma waited, knowing that whatever Marcus was about to propose would be designed to benefit only him. "Your brother withdraws from the state championship. He tells everyone he's injured, can't compete. The scholarship offer goes away, the MMA program loses its poster boy, and funding gets redirected to programs that actually matter. And in exchange? In exchange, your friend Sophia's family keeps their city contracts. You finish the school year without any more complications, and your brother doesn't have to worry about any more investigations into his training methods." Emma felt a surge of anger at the casual way Marcus discussed destroying her brother's dreams. "And if I refuse?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Then Sophia's family loses their contracts by next week. Your brother gets hit with more accusations. Maybe something about illegal gambling on fights or underage drinking at training sessions. Amazing how easy it is to find witnesses when you know where to look. You're talking about fraud, fabricating evidence. I'm talking about people coming forward with information they've been too scared to share before," Marcus said smoothly. "Very different thing." Emma looked around the parking lot, confirming that they were alone except for a few cars in the distance. She activated the voice recorder app on her phone, hoping the device would pick up Marcus's words. "Let me make sure I understand," Emma said carefully. "You're threatening to destroy my friend's family business and frame my brother for crimes he didn't commit unless he withdraws from a competition he's trained years for. I'm offering you a chance to avoid unnecessary suffering," Marcus replied. "Your family doesn't belong in this town, Emma. You're not wanted here. Your brother's violence, your constant need for special treatment, it's disrupting the natural order of things." "Tyler," laughed at this, and Cameron nodded agreement. Emma realized that they genuinely believed their own justifications, that they had convinced themselves their cruelty was somehow righteous. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," Marcus said. "Talk to your brother. Make him understand what's at stake. And if Jake says no?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time, Emma saw genuine malice in his expression. "Then Friday's pep rally is going to be very interesting. We're planning something special to demonstrate school spirit. Something involving ramps and gravity and what happens when people don't know their place." The threat was clear enough that Emma felt her blood run cold. The pep rally would be held in the gymnasium, which was accessible only by a long, steep ramp that led from the main floor down to the court level. If someone were to tamper with her wheelchair on that ramp— "You're talking about attempted murder," Emma said quietly. "I'm talking about accidents," Marcus replied. "Tragic, preventable accidents that happen when people put themselves in dangerous situations." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Emma? If you try to record our conversations or gather evidence against me, remember that my father reviews all the city's disability services contracts. Your family's insurance support, your home modifications, your transportation assistance, all of that could disappear with a single phone call." Emma watched the three boys walk away, her mind reeling from the scope of Marcus's threats. He wasn't just a high school bully. He was systematically using his family's political power to terrorize anyone who stood in his way. As soon as they were out of sight, Emma checked her phone recording. The audio quality was poor, and Marcus had been careful to speak in generalities that could be interpreted in multiple ways. It wouldn't be enough to prove anything in court, but it was better than nothing. Emma sat alone in the parking lot as the sun began to set behind the mountains, trying to process everything that had just happened. Marcus had given her an impossible choice: sacrifice Jake's future or risk Sophia's family's livelihood and potentially her own life. But Emma was beginning to realize that Marcus had made a crucial mistake. He had assumed that because she was physically vulnerable, she was helpless. He had forgotten that intelligence could be just as powerful as strength, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who had nothing left to lose. As Emma wheeled herself toward the bus stop, she began formulating a plan. Marcus wanted to play games with power and influence. Emma would show him what happened when someone underestimated the determination of a girl who had spent her entire life learning how to overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. Emma spent the entire bus ride home formulating her plan. By the time she reached her front door, she had identified 3 critical objectives: protect Sophia's family, ensure Jake could compete safely, and expose Marcus's corruption before he could hurt anyone else. The first step was gathering allies, but she had to be careful. Marcus had demonstrated that he could reach beyond the school to hurt people's families and livelihoods. Emma needed help from someone with power and resources that the Reed family couldn't easily threaten. That evening, while her family was watching television, Emma researched the Colorado State Athletic Commission. The organization that governed amateur MMA competitions had strict policies about interference and corruption. More importantly, they had investigators with authority that extended beyond local politics. Emma found what she was looking for in the commission's anti-corruption hotline. They took anonymous tips about match fixing, doping scandals, and attempts to influence competitions through intimidation or bribery. The hotline was staffed 24/7 and promised immediate investigation of credible threats. At 9:30 p.m., Emma called from her bedroom, using a voice-changing app on her phone to disguise her identity. Athletic Commission Hotline, this is Detective Sarah Murphy. I want to report attempted sabotage of a competitor in the upcoming state championship, Emma said, her electronically altered voice sounding robotic but clear. Can you provide details about the nature of this sabotage? Emma had prepared carefully for this conversation. A competitor named Jake Chen has been falsely accused of doping in order to disqualify him. The accusations are coming from local political figures who want to eliminate MMA programs from high schools. Do you have evidence of these false accusations? The accusations coincide with threats made against the competitor's family. I can provide documentation of harassment and intimidation tactics designed to force the competitor to withdraw. Detective Murphy's tone became more serious. Sir, are you saying that political figures are using intimidation to influence athletic competitions? I'm saying that Mayor Robert Reed of Riverside, Colorado, is using his position to target a 17-year-old athlete whose success threatens his son's college prospects. Emma spent 20 minutes providing details, careful to stick to facts she could prove. She mentioned the suspicious timing of the doping investigation, the threats against local businesses, and the pattern of harassment directed at Jake's family. She promised to email documentation within 24 hours. After hanging up, Emma felt a surge of satisfaction. The athletic commission had resources and authority that Marcus couldn't threaten or bribe. Even if Mayor Reed tried to interfere, the commission operated at the state level, beyond his local influence. But Emma's immediate problem was still the Friday pep rally. Marcus had essentially promised to cause an accident that could seriously injure or kill her. She needed to either avoid the event entirely or turn it into a trap for Marcus instead of herself. Emma spent 2 hours researching the gymnasium's layout and the accessibility ramp that Marcus planned to use against her. The ramp was indeed steep and long, designed to meet ADA requirements but still challenging for wheelchair users. If someone tampered with her chair's brakes or wheels at the top of the ramp, the results could be catastrophic. But Emma realized that Marcus's plan had a fundamental flaw. It required her to be on the ramp at a specific time when he could sabotage her wheelchair without witnesses. What if she controlled when and how that happened? The next morning, Emma arrived at school with a small toolkit hidden in her backpack. During her lunch period, she made her way to the gymnasium and carefully examined the accessibility ramp. The route was monitored by security cameras, which meant any sabotage would be recorded if she could time it correctly. Emma spent 15 minutes loosening several bolts on her wheelchair's right wheel assembly, not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to create visible wobbling that would alert anyone watching. She also applied a small amount of clear nail polish to the brake mechanism, creating a slight delay in engagement that would be noticeable to an experienced wheelchair user but might appear accidental to observers. If Marcus attempted to sabotage her chair, the existing damage would make his tampering obvious. If he tried to push her down the ramp, the security cameras would capture assault. Either way, Emma would have evidence of attempted violence. Emma's relief was overwhelming. Sophia was safe, which meant Marcus hadn't followed through on his threats against her family yet. But it also meant Emma's deadline was approaching. She had until Friday morning to give Marcus an answer about Jake's withdrawal from the championship. Instead of going home after school, Emma wheeled herself to the public library downtown. The Riverside Public Library had been renovated 2 years ago with full accessibility features and high-speed internet that was faster than what most students had at home. Emma spent 3 hours creating a comprehensive dossier on Marcus Reed and his family's connections. She documented every instance of harassment she could prove, compiled screenshots of threatening messages, and researched the legal statutes that Marcus had likely violated. More importantly, Emma discovered something that Marcus probably didn't know about himself. His acceptance to Colorado State University was contingent on maintaining his status as team captain of the football team. If Marcus were suspended from school or lost his leadership position, his college admission could be revoked. Emma also found records of previous complaints against the Reed family's construction company, safety violations, permit irregularities, and accusations of bid rigging on city contracts. The pattern suggested a family that had grown comfortable using influence to avoid consequences for their actions. As Emma compiled her research, a new strategy began forming in her mind. Marcus had threatened to use Friday's pep rally against her, but what if she used it against him instead? The pep rally would be attended by the entire school, plus parents and community members. Local reporters often covered major school events, especially when they involved the football team before important games. If Emma could expose Marcus's behavior in such a public setting, the social. But Emma's masterstroke was the final attachment, a detailed analysis of how the harassment campaign fit the legal definition of criminal conspiracy and civil rights violations. Emma had discovered that using government power to discriminate against disabled individuals was a federal crime, punishable by both fines and imprisonment. By targeting Emma because of her disability and using city resources to threaten her family's support services, Mayor Reed had potentially violated several federal statutes. The Athletic Commission might only be able to protect Jake's competition eligibility, but federal investigators could hold the entire Reed family accountable. That evening, Emma finally told Jake about Marcus's ultimatum. They sat in Jake's basement gym, the space that had become his sanctuary over the past 3 years. "So you're telling me that if I compete on Saturday, Marcus is going to try to hurt you on Friday?" Jake asked, his voice deadly calm. "That's what he's threatening." "But Jake, I have a plan." Emma explained her strategy, the Athletic Commission investigation, the federal civil rights angle, and her intention to expose Marcus publicly at the pep rally. Jake listened carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. "Emma, this is too dangerous. What if your plan doesn't work? What if Marcus hurts you before the authorities can stop him? Then you win the state championship and get your scholarship," Emma replied firmly. "Jake, you've trained for this for years. You're not giving up your future because some rich kid thinks he can intimidate our family." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the heavy bag that had absorbed thousands of hours of his training. When he spoke, his voice carried a resolution that Emma had never heard before. "Okay, but we do this together. If you're going to confront Marcus at the pep rally, I want to be there." "You can't be there," Emma said quickly. "If Marcus sees you, he'll know I told you everything. That breaks his rules, and he'll follow through on all his threats immediately. Then what do you need from me?" Emma smiled, and for the first time in days she felt genuinely confident about their chances. "I need you to trust me, and I need you to win that championship. Because when this is over, I want Marcus to know that he lost to a family that refuses to be intimidated." Jake nodded slowly. "All right, but Emma, if anything goes wrong, if you feel unsafe for even a second, you get out of there. Promise me." "I promise," Emma said, though they both knew that promises were easy to make and much harder to keep when the stakes were life and death. As they headed upstairs for dinner, Emma felt the weight of the next 24 hours pressing down on her. Tomorrow would determine whether her plan succeeded in exposing Marcus's corruption, or whether his threats would finally escalate into violence. But for the first time since this conflict began, Emma felt like she was the one controlling the situation. Marcus had made the mistake of underestimating her intelligence and determination. Tomorrow he would learn what happened when someone tried to intimidate a girl who had spent her entire life overcoming obstacles that seemed impossible. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made the October air feel heavy and expectant. Emma woke before her alarm, her mind immediately snapping to full alertness as she remembered what lay ahead. Today was the pep rally. Today was when Marcus would either back down or follow through on his threats. Emma dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would photograph well if reporters were present. She selected a bright red sweater that would stand out in crowd shots and made sure her phone was fully charged with backup power banks in her bag. If things went according to plan, Today would be extensively documented. At breakfast, her parents seemed unusually chatty, probably sensing the tension in the house without understanding its source. Sarah had made Emma's favorite pancakes, and Michael lingered over his coffee instead of rushing off to work. "Big day today," Michael said, glancing between his twins. "Jake's got his final training session before tomorrow's championship, and Emma's got that pep rally." "I might skip the pep rally," Jake said casually, though Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. "Coach wants me to focus on mental preparation." "That's probably smart," Sarah agreed. "Too much excitement before a big competition can throw off your concentration." Emma caught Jake's eye across the table. They had discussed this the night before. Jake's absence from the pep rally was crucial to Emma's plan. Marcus needed to believe that Jake didn't know about the threats, that Emma was isolated and vulnerable. "I'll take pictures for you," Emma told Jake, her voice carrying a double meaning that only he would understand. At school, Emma immediately noticed increased security around the gymnasium. 2 additional campus security officers were stationed near the main entrance, and she spotted Principal Williams walking the perimeter with the head of maintenance. Emma wondered if her report about harassment had prompted these precautions, or if it was standard protocol for large events. During the first period, Emma received a text from another unknown number. "Last chance to make the smart choice. After 2 p.m., the offer expires." Emma saved the screenshot and replied, "See you at the pep rally." The response came immediately, "Looking forward to it." Emma spent her morning classes in a state of heightened awareness, noting the positions of security cameras, identifying potential witnesses, and mentally rehearsing her plan. She had learned from Jake's MMA training that preparation was everything. The fight was often won or lost before the first punch was thrown. Emma made her way to the gymnasium to check her preparations from the previous day. Security cameras were functioning normally, and her deliberately loosened wheelchair components were holding but noticeably unstable. Anyone attempting to examine or tamper with her chair would immediately notice the existing damage. Emma also confirmed that the local newspaper photographer was setting up equipment near the main stage. The Riverside Tribune always covered pep rallies, but today they seemed to be preparing for more extensive documentation than usual. Emma suspected that Principal Williams had alerted the media about potential incidents, though she couldn't be certain. At 1:45 p.m., students began filing into the gymnasium for the 2 o'clock pep rally. Emma positioned herself strategically near the top of the accessibility ramp, where she would be visible to both security cameras and the assembled crowd. The location also gave her a clear view of all entrances, allowing her to track Marcus's movements. The gymnasium filled quickly with the excited chatter of students, teachers, and parents. The Jefferson High Eagles were playing their homecoming game that evening against their biggest rivals, and the energy in the room was electric. The marching band warmed up with scattered notes and drum rolls, while cheerleaders practiced their routines on the main floor. Emma spotted Marcus near the football team's designated seating area, wearing his Letterman jacket and maintaining the image of the all-American student athlete. He was laughing with teammates and posing for pictures with younger students who asked. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what he pretended to be, a popular, successful young man with a bright future. But Emma noticed things others missed. Marcus's eyes kept scanning the crowd, locating exit routes and checking for adult supervision. His conversations with Tyler and Cameron involved more pointing and gesturing than typical teenage banter. Most tellingly, he had positioned himself with a clear line of sight to Emma's location near the ramp. At exactly 2 p.m., Principal Williams took the microphone and called for attention. The pep rally followed its traditional format: introductions of fall sports teams, recognition of academic achievements, and spirited chants led by the cheerleaders. Emma participated enthusiastically, wanting to appear relaxed and unsuspecting. 20 minutes into the event, During a particularly loud cheer routine, Emma noticed Marcus excusing himself from his teammates. He moved casually toward the side of the gymnasium, taking a route that would bring him near the top of the accessibility ramp where Emma was positioned. Emma's heart rate increased, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She activated the voice recording app on her phone and positioned the device to capture both audio and video of whatever was about to happen. Marcus approached with his characteristic false friendliness, stopping just close enough to speak without shouting over the crowd noise. "Emma," he said, his voice barely audible above the cheering, "I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." "I am smart," Emma replied, making sure her phone was capturing their conversation. "Smart enough to know when someone is bluffing." Marcus's expression hardened slightly, though he maintained his smile for anyone who might be watching. "You think I'm bluffing? Let me show you how serious I am." Emma felt Marcus's hand on the back of her wheelchair, ostensibly a friendly gesture, but actually checking the stability of her chair. His fingers found the loosened bolts on her right wheel assembly, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Something wrong with your chair?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern that would sound caring to any eavesdropper. "Just normal wear and tear," Emma replied calmly. "These things happen when you use equipment every day." Marcus moved around to the side of Emma's wheelchair, positioning himself between her and the main crowd. To observers, it would look like he was being helpful, perhaps offering to assist with her equipment problems. "You know," Marcus said quietly, his hands now resting on Emma's wheel rim, "accidents happen all the time with mechanical equipment, especially on steep ramps like this one." Emma felt the wheelchair shift slightly as Marcus tested the loosened components. His touch was subtle but deliberate, designed to worsen the existing damage without appearing aggressive. "Marcus," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "are you tampering with my wheelchair?" "I'm trying to help," Marcus replied, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "It looks like something's wrong with your brakes." Emma realized that Marcus was setting up his cover story. He would claim he was trying to help when her wheelchair malfunctioned on the ramp. The loosened bolts she had prepared as evidence were being turned into part of his alibi, but Emma had anticipated this possibility. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a phone charger, but was actually a personal safety alarm. The device would emit a piercing siren if activated, guaranteed to draw immediate attention from everyone in the gymnasium. "Marcus," Emma said, holding the device where he could see it, "I want you to step away from my wheelchair." Marcus's eyes fixed on the alarm device, recognizing it for what it was. His casual demeanor began to crack as he realized that Emma was more prepared than he had expected. "There's no need for dramatics," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge of frustration. "I'm just trying to help with your equipment problem." "What equipment problem?" Emma asked loudly, her voice carrying over the crowd noise. Several students near them turned to look, drawn by the tension in her tone. Marcus found himself trapped between his desire to sabotage Emma's wheelchair and his need to maintain his public image. With students beginning to pay attention, any obvious aggression would be witnessed and remembered. "Your wheel is loose," Marcus said, forced to speak more loudly as the crowd around them grew quiet. "I was trying to tighten it for you." Emma looked down at her wheelchair, where Marcus's tampering had indeed loosened the already damaged components. But instead of appearing accidental, the damage now looked obviously deliberate. Bolts that had been finger-tight were now completely loose, and Marcus's fingerprints were all over the metal surfaces. "That's interesting," Emma said, pulling out her phone and starting to record video. "Because my wheelchair was fine this morning. Can you explain how it got damaged while you were trying to help?" Marcus realized his mistake too late. He had been so focused on creating an accident that he had failed to consider how his sabotage would appear to witnesses. Now with students watching and Emma recording, his tampering looked exactly like what it was: deliberate sabotage. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, stepping back from the wheelchair. "But the damage was done, literally and figuratively." Emma activated her safety alarm. The piercing siren cut through the gymnasium noise like a knife, instantly silencing the pep rally and drawing every eye to the top of the accessibility ramp. Principal Williams grabbed the microphone. The security officers started moving toward the sound, and the newspaper photographer swung his camera toward the disturbance. "Help!" Emma called out, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Someone has been tampering with my wheelchair." Emma held up her phone, displaying the video she had just recorded of Marcus's hands on her equipment. On the small screen, Marcus could be clearly seen loosening bolts and manipulating her wheelchair's brake mechanism. The gymnasium erupted in confused murmurs as students tried to understand what was happening. Marcus stood frozen beside Emma's wheelchair, his hands still marked with grease from the sabotaged components, facing a crowd of witnesses who had just watched him tamper with a disabled student's mobility equipment for the first time since this conflict began. Marcus Reed looked exactly like what he was: a bully caught in the act of trying to hurt someone more vulnerable than himself. Emma smiled as security officers approached, and Principal Williams called for everyone to remain calm. Marcus had fallen into her trap perfectly, and now the entire Jefferson High community would witness the consequences of his actions. The pep rally had become something entirely different than anyone had planned. It had become Marcus Reed's public downfall. The aftermath of the pep rally moved with the swift efficiency of a system finally functioning as it should. Within minutes, campus security had cordoned off the area around Emma's wheelchair, treating it as a crime scene. Principal Williams called for the immediate evacuation of the gymnasium, while police officers were summoned to document the evidence of tampering. Marcus stood in stunned silence as Officer Jennifer Torres, the school's resource officer, photographed his grease-stained hands and the obviously sabotaged wheelchair components. The video on Emma's phone had captured everything: Marcus's deliberate loosening of bolts, his manipulation of the brake mechanism, and his attempts to create what would have appeared to be a tragic accident. "Mr. Reed," Officer Torres said, her voice professionally neutral, "I need you to come with me for questioning." As Marcus was led away, Emma noticed his teammates and friends beginning to distance themselves. Tyler and Cameron, who had been his constant companions in harassment, suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. The social dynamics of Jefferson High were shifting in real time as students processed what they had witnessed. Emma spent the next 2 hours providing statements to police, school administrators, and her parents, who had arrived within minutes of being contacted. Sarah Chun's hands shook as she examined the tampered wheelchair, understanding how close her daughter had come to serious injury or death. "Why didn't you tell us?" Michael Chen asked, his voice heavy with emotion and frustration. "We could have protected you." "I needed to handle this myself, Dad," Emma replied. "And I needed to make sure Marcus couldn't hurt anyone else." The scope of Marcus's downfall became clear over the following hours. The video of his sabotage attempt had been shared across social media platforms, generating thousands of views and comments from outraged viewers. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a shocking case of disability-based harassment in a small Colorado town. Emma's careful preparation ensured that the consequences extended far beyond social media outrage. Detective Sarah Murphy from the Colorado State Athletic Commission arrived at Jefferson High that evening, armed with a folder thick with evidence that Emma had provided over the past 48 hours. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that reached beyond high school bullying into actual criminal territory. Mayor Robert Reed had indeed used his position to pressure the Athletic Commission regarding Jake's drug testing, violating state laws about political interference in sporting events. The threats against Sophia's family business constitute extortion. While the systematic harassment of Emma qualified as civil rights violations under federal disability protection statutes, Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, with snow threatening in the mountains west of Denver. Jake Chun stood in the warm-up area of the Colorado State Amateur MMA Championship, his mind focused entirely on the upcoming fight, despite the chaos that had consumed the previous 24 hours. Emma sat in the front row of the arena, her repaired wheelchair positioned where Jake could see her between rounds. She wore a bright blue t-shirt with Team Chen printed across the front, a last-minute creation by Sophia, who had driven 3 hours to attend the championship despite her family's recent ordeal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, introducing in the blue corner, representing Riverside High School and Rodriguez MMA Academy, with a record of 12 wins and 1 loss, Jake Chun. The crowd erupted as Jake entered the octagon, his calm demeanor hiding the years of training and sacrifice that had led to this moment. Emma cheered loudly, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the previous week's drama and everything to do with her brother's dedication and skill. Jake's opponent was Marcus Hendricks, a wrestler from Colorado Springs with an impressive record and college scholarship offers from several Division I programs. The fight would be 3 5-minute rounds, with victory determined by judges' decision if no knockout or submission occurred. The opening round showcased both fighters' skills, with Jake's striking precision matching Hendricks' wrestling dominance. Emma found herself holding her breath during ground exchanges, remembering the countless hours Jake had spent perfecting his submission defense in their basement gym. Between rounds, Jake glanced toward Emma's section and caught her eye. She gave him a thumbs-up sign that carried years of shared understanding. They had both faced their challenges this week, and they had both emerged stronger. The second round belongs entirely to Jake. His conditioning showed as Hendricks began to slow, and Jake's combinations became more fluid and devastating. A perfectly timed knee strike followed by a series of punches dropped Hendricks to the canvas, where Jake secured a rear naked choke that forced his opponent to tap out with 30 seconds remaining in the round. The arena exploded in celebration as Jake was declared the Colorado State Amateur MMA champion. Emma wheeled herself as close to the octagon as security would allow, tears streaming down her face as Jake pointed toward her section and mouthed, "Thank you." The victory ceremony was everything Emma had hoped for her brother. Jake stood on the podium wearing his gold medal, flanked by silver and bronze medalists who had fought valiantly but couldn't match his combination of skill, heart, and determination. Representatives from 3 different colleges approached Jake's coach with scholarship offers, each more generous than the last. But the most satisfying moment came during Jake's post-fight interview with the local sports reporter. "Jake," the reporter asked, "this has been a challenging week for your family with the harassment incident at your school. How did that affect your preparation for tonight's fight?" Jake looked directly into the camera, his expression serious but confident. "My sister Emma taught me something important this week. She showed me that real strength isn't about being able to hurt other people. It's about protecting the people you care about and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." He paused, glancing toward Emma in the crowd. "Marcus Reed thought he could intimidate my family because my sister uses a wheelchair. He learned that intelligence and courage are more powerful than bullying and corruption. Emma didn't need me to fight her battles, she won them herself." The interview was broadcast throughout Colorado and picked up by national sports networks, turning Emma's stand against Marcus into a story of inspiration rather than victimization. 3 weeks later, Emma received a thick envelope from the University of Colorado Boulder. Inside was an acceptance letter to their chemistry program, along with a full academic scholarship and a personal note from the department chair praising her exceptional academic achievement and demonstrated leadership in the face of adversity. The letter was followed by similar offers from Colorado State, the University of Denver, and 2 out-of-state schools that had learned about Emma's story through news coverage. For the first time in her life, Emma had more opportunities then. She knew how to evaluate. Marcus Reed's consequences had been swift and comprehensive. He was expelled from Jefferson High School for assault and property destruction, ending his football career and voiding his college admission to Colorado State. The criminal charges against him included attempted assault, vandalism, and conspiracy to commit injury to a disabled person, charges that would follow him for years. Mayor Robert Reed faced federal investigation for civil rights violations and abuse of political power. The Reed family's construction company lost all city contracts pending the outcome of corruption investigations, and Robert Reed announced he would not seek re-election as mayor. Tyler Brooks and Cameron Walsh received suspensions and were removed from the football team for their roles in the harassment campaign. The Jefferson High Eagles finished their season with a losing record, their team chemistry destroyed by the scandal surrounding their former teammates. But perhaps the most meaningful consequence was the change that rippled through Jefferson High School itself. Principal Williams implemented new anti-bullying protocols specifically designed to protect students with disabilities. The school board voted to maintain funding for the MMA program, recognizing it as a positive outlet for student athletes. Emma found herself in an unexpected position of influence. Consulted by school administrators about accessibility improvements, and invited to speak at assemblies about disability rights and standing up to bullying. On a cold December morning, Emma sat in the same chemistry lab where she had first confided in Sophia about her college dreams. They were working on their final project of the semester, a complex analysis of environmental pollutants that would serve as Emma's capstone presentation for her scholarship applications. "So have you decided which college you're going to choose?" Sophia asked as they calibrated their equipment. Emma smiled, looking around the lab that had been her sanctuary during the darkest period of the harassment campaign. "I think I'm going to choose the University of Washington. They have an amazing chemistry program, and Seattle is about as far from Riverside as I can get while still staying in the country. You're not scared about being so far from your family?" Emma considered the question, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. "I used to think I needed my family to protect me from the world, but I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I can handle whatever comes next." That evening, Emma and Jake sat in the basement gym where so much of their preparation had taken place. Jake's state championship medal hung on the wall next to a framed newspaper article about Emma's courage in exposing Marcus's corruption. "Are you going to miss this place?" Jake asked, adjusting the weight plates on his bench press. Emma looked around the basement that had been Jake's refuge and her symbol of limitation, the one part of their house she couldn't access independently. Now it felt less like a barrier and more like a reminder of how far they had both come. "I'm going to miss watching you train," Emma said, "but I'm excited about what comes next for both of us." Jake had chosen to accept a full scholarship to the University of Northern Colorado, where he would study exercise science while competing on their Division I MA team. The separation would be the longest the twins had ever experienced, but they both understood it was necessary for their growth. 6 months later, Emma wheeled herself across the stage at Jefferson High School's graduation ceremony, accepting her diploma as valedictorian of her class. The gymnasium where Marcus had tried to harm her had been transformed into a celebration of achievement and possibility. As Emma delivered her valedictorian speech, she looked out at an audience that included her family, Sophia, several of her teachers, and dozens of students who had learned from her example that courage could take many forms. "When I started high school," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the gymnasium, "I thought my disability defined my limitations. I believed that my wheelchair determined what I could and couldn't accomplish. She paused, making eye contact with individuals in the crowd who had been part of her journey. But I learned that the only real limitations are the ones we accept for ourselves. When someone tries to make you feel small or powerless, remember that intelligence, determination, and moral courage are forces that no bully can defeat. Emma's speech received a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes, with teachers, parents, and students recognizing not just her academic achievements, but her transformation from victim to victor. As she wheeled off the stage, diploma in hand, and her future stretching ahead like an open road, Emma Chun knew that she had learned the most important lesson of all, that strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from refusing to let those challenges define your limitations. Marcus Reed had tried to push her down a ramp and instead had pushed her toward a future brighter than she had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.